Today I'll be answering question one from my media evaluation about whether or not my film as a genre conforms or challenges the different codes and conventions that a normal conventional real media product of my genre would do. Invisible People, my film, is a social realism film, and much like other social realism films, the narrative that it has is linear. It goes from one event to another because it's such a serious topic that happens from day to day, and it's something that people take seriously and to heart a lot of the time. I feel like to make sure that heartfeltness and the truth behind what's happening comes across to an audience, it needs to be a linear narrative. I think a non-linear narrative, it would be quite innovative if you could make it work and still be heartfelt. But I feel as if to get the audience's attention, if they're watching that particular genre, I feel like the narrative needs to be linear. So we've definitely conformed when it comes to the narrative side of things, and we've gone with a linear narrative to make sense and to follow Arthur's life in a linear way. Characters, we have one main character and a lot of characters who come in and are floating through the process of this story that affect him in some way, much like I, Daniel Blake, and other Ken Loach films that are also social realism. They follow the life of one main character, and this main character then has a lot of other characters come throughout his life and intertwine and relate to the character in different ways and bring up different parts of his story and his background and his life in different circumstances and in different ways that create different emotions from both the audience and the characters in the film. So in that respect, I feel like we've conformed with the norm of social realism films and have kind of gone with an amount of characters that is quite ordinary in social realism, the genre. Dialogue. I feel as if some of the dialogue we've used to kind of challenge this norm. We've had a lot of dialogue that has been, especially with the boys, the boys that come and like burn his stuff down. It's quite long, and there's long sentences in what they're saying, and they're quite powerful and quite disturbing. And in a social realism film, normally you don't kind of experience these too disturbing ideas through the dialogue, but in our film we kind of challenged it a little bit. But at the same time, in terms of length, throughout the film we have very minimal dialogue. This is because we kind of want to show in life behavior, movement, and kind of the way we move as people is more common than speaking. We don't walk around speaking 80-90% of the time like we do in a film. But in a social realism film, because we're trying to get the truth and the genuine side of society through the film, we've kind of stuck with this norm of a social realism film and kept the dialogue minimal to kind of push that purpose. Mise en scène. So the costume of our film first. The costume is quite, it's the norm. So we've kind of chosen costume that has suited the genre and suited the characters that we've involved. So for the boys that kind of end up burning his home, we've chosen quite kind of rundownish outfits, but as they're kind of upper class boys, they've got kind of some nice clothes, but they've got clothes that kind of suit their backgrounds. So we haven't tried to challenge anything there. but with Arthur himself, we have. So instead of a typical homeless person just having a complete like torn stuff, torn clothes, we've kind of had a search around ourselves, and not everyone is in this situation. Sometimes they have a few nice items that they kind of relate to and want to wear a lot of the time. So Arthur, in this case, he has a nice pair of shoes and a nice pair of trousers, and although they're dirty and muddy and kind of like unclean a lot of the time, he tries to keep them as clean as he can to keep himself presentable. This kind of adds another element to his character that not a lot of characters in social realism films have. For the other characters, Sarah and the little boy in the church, we've just kind of tried to keep their clothes as generic as possible. So kind of going with the norm in terms of having that contrast between homelessness and non-homelessness, really, kind of conforming to that social realism genre. In terms of makeup, we've kept it quite minimal as well. This kind of relates to social realism, as kind of they just want to display it as plain and simple as it is in kind of the real world. Lighting is a part of our film that we've taken quite seriously. We in the church scene, I think we definitely have challenged the idea of social realism and the way that lighting is displayed. I mean, in social realism films, for lighting, it's kept quite blue. The tones are quite grey and dark. But for the church scene, we've tried to brighten things up a little bit to kind of create that element of hope for his character and the storyline behind Arthur. We tried to convey through that scene, especially in terms of lighting. But then for the rest of our film, we've kind of conformed with the idea of keeping those darker tones, those grey kind of poignant colours through the lighting. So the colour grading and the lighting kind of work hand in hand in that sort of like conforming towards that social realism genre. Camera movement. I think we've challenged the idea of camera movement in terms of the way we've kind of visually displayed our film as a social realism film in Invisible People, because I think in normal social realism films, a lot of the time you experience kind of quite static, quite here it is kind of camera like angles and movements. I feel like a lot of the camera movements are there to just display what's going on in front of them and to not really give any sort of emotion behind the movements themselves. Whereas we've kind of tried to show a sense of the rush and a sense of the panic and franticness through Covent Garden in relation to Arthur, in the way we move the camera throughout the Covent Garden scene especially. I think that is trying to completely challenge the norm in terms of this genre, in terms of camera angles and movements. Another way we've kind of tried to change this norm in terms of camera movements is by using the camera movements to display reactions and emotions rather than the person speaking the dialogue. So a lot of the time we'll use the shot from the person that's receiving the information rather than the person relaying that information. In the editing, we've kind of kept a norm and kind of conformed with the idea of social realism genres, trying to not do too much snappy, clever editing, not too many fades and transitions. We want to keep it quite period and quite to the point. Same with, I think the editing goes hand in hand with the narrative and sort of the linear narrative, just relaying exactly what the point is, and the social realism film, because at the end of the day, the narrative and the characters are the most important thing within this film. We just want to kind of get Arthur's story across as much as we can, and I think that relates a lot to how social realism producers and directors think about how they want their films to be conveyed. So I feel like in some ways we've challenged the norm in terms of social realism, but then in other ways we kind of want to stick with the originality and kind of the way that social realism audiences expect their films to be shown. So yeah, that's kind of my overall answer to question 1 in terms of my film and how that relates or challenges the norms of real media products. Thank you.